March 17th, 1943 dates. Located in Berlin. Tirpitz Sofa, 76 to 78. It was with such force that the folder smashed down the mahogany desk that coffee sprayed out of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris's china cup. This resulted in intelligence reports being stained, which would have resulted in the Gestapo executing the individual if they were discovered. Completely impossible, Canaris proclaimed. Propaganda is being fed to us by Americans who have disguised themselves as agents. It was possible for Canaris to view the Landwehr Canal, which was the location where Rosa Luxemburg's body had been deposited 24 years previously, through the towering windows of the Abwehr headquarters. At this moment, he was the chief of German military intelligence, and he was holding in his hands a report that contradicted not just the propaganda of the Nazis, but also the whole mathematical basis upon which the German victory was built. The Willow Run facility of the Ford Motor Company was building one 4-engine B-24 Liberator bomber every hour, as shown by communications that were intercepted and information from agents who were still working in Mexico City. The B-24 Liberator, which consisted of 1.5 million different parts, 450,000 rivets, and 30,000 unique components, was constructed into an airplane that weighed 18 tons and was able to roll off an assembly line quicker than Germany could build a basic Kübelwagen combat vehicle. Heinz, Major Friedrich Wilhelm, had performed a thorough examination of the intelligence while he was standing at attention in front of Canaris's desk. Nothing changed with regard to the numbers. They were both unaware of the fact that this particular moment would set off the most catastrophic intelligence failure in the history of modern warfare. This failure was the systematic inability of German intelligence to comprehend, believe, or effectively communicate the true scale of American industrial capacity to the leadership of the Nazi Party. This failure ultimately led to the destruction of the Third Reich, as a result of a fatal miscalculation of mathematical inevitability. The German intelligence community's failure to provide accurate information on American manufacturing had begun 2 years earlier. The findings that were provided to Hermann Göring in 1941 by Luftwaffe General Karl Kohler were from military attaché General Friedrich von Bottcher in Washington. These studies said that the production of aircraft in the United States was getting close to 2,000 planes per month. Göring had declared, "Americans can only build refrigerators and razor blades, not military aircraft." "The Americans are bluffing," Göring had told Hitler in the Wolf's Lair in December 1941, 4 days after Pearl Harbor. Göring had chuckled, physically laughing when he made this declaration. Their democratic system leaves them vulnerable. Their ineffectiveness can be attributed to their diverse population. Jews are the source of their corruption. In all likelihood, they are unable to produce what they assert. By March 1943, German intelligence networks all throughout the Americas were reporting something that contradicted every assumption that Nazi economic thinking and racial ideology had made up to that point. Several various sources were responsible for the information, including Mexican manufacturers who were friendly to Germany, Spanish diplomats, Swedish business people who were traveling through Detroit, and even letters that were intercepted from American workers to family who were living in neutral nations. Every single one of them stated the same unfathomable fact. The Willow Run facility of Ford was manufacturing more heavy bombers than all of Germany's aircraft manufacturers combined. Over the course of 3 weeks, Oberstleutnant Nicholas Ritter, who was in charge of the Air Intelligence Department of the Abwehr upon Führer Luft, had focused on examining the data. Ritter, a former Lufthansa pilot who had lived in the United States for 10 years before to the war, had a greater understanding of the industrial capabilities of the United States than the majority of German commanders. The Chrysler Building was being constructed in Manhattan during the 1920s. And his flat in Manhattan offered a view of the construction. In less than 2 years, he had witnessed the United States of America construct the highest structure in the world. The assessment that Ritter sent to Canaris was as follows: "Herr Admiral, if these numbers are accurate, and I believe they are, then Germany has already experienced defeat in the war. At this point, The only things that remain are a matter of time and mathematics. The information was obtained along meandering paths, each of which was more perilous than the one that came before it. Georg Nicholas, who was in charge of the principal network of the Abwehr in Mexico City, had developed relationships with American merchants who were able to easily travel between Detroit and the oil fields of Mexico. These gentlemen casually discussed the miracles they had experienced, completely oblivious to the fact that German operatives were recording their talks over supper. An American oil executive named Harold Morrison had been present at a banquet held by the German-Mexican Commerce Association in Mexico City on February 3, 1943. Following the consumption of a number of tequilas, Morrison started recounting his recent visit to the Willow Run plant, which had been organized by Ford in order to demonstrate to prospective investors the capacity of the firm to execute government contracts. "Gentlemen," Morrison had remarked, not realizing that Wolfgang Blau, a German agent pretending to be an Argentine leather dealer, was committing every word to memory. "What I saw is beyond description," Blau had said. "1.5 miles is the length of the assembly line. Because of the enormous size of the facility, clouds are able to develop inside of it, and it does rain inside of the factory on occasion. They have 42,000 workers, including thousands of women, Negro women, building the most complex machine ever created," Morrison said as he grabbed up a pencil and began drawing on a napkin. "They have 42,000 workers. In addition to having 4 engines, each of which generates 1,200 horsepower, the bomber is equipped with 2 bomb bays, each of which can contain 4,000 pounds of firearms. They are manufactured in portions, which Ford refers to as sub-assemblies, and these parts tend to converge like rivers that pour into the ocean. It is possible to get fuselages from one way, wing parts from another, and tail assemblies from a third route. But surely such complexity means frequent breakdowns and production delays," Blau had remarked, attempting to seem casually interested in the situation. "But they meet at precise points along the line." Morrison had a jiggling chuckle. The Consolidated Aircraft Company had that line of thinking. They ridiculed Ford and asserted that it is impossible to construct airplanes in the same manner as automobiles. On the other hand, Ford classified the bomber into 60,000 distinct activities. Repeatedly, each worker is responsible for carrying out the same duty. Currently, a mother who was preparing breakfast for her children the day before is installing hydraulic lines in the rear area of the vehicle. They are trained in a matter of days, not months. Spain under Francisco Franco was the source of some of the most precise intelligence it ever possessed. In Washington, Colonel José Ungría, the Spanish military attaché, developed good contacts with American aircraft manufacturers. At the same time, he discreetly provided Germany with intelligence in exchange for tungsten supplies that were essential to the Spanish industry. In March of 1943, Ungría was present at a reception held at the Argentine embassy. It was then that he had the opportunity to meet Charles Sorensen, who was the production head at Ford and the creator of Willow Run. When Sorensen was speaking, he openly discussed the capabilities of the facility because he was under the impression that he was speaking to a representative of a neutral nation that may acquire planes after the war. "Colonel," Sorensen had remarked, not realizing that every word would be in Berlin within 2 weeks. "When I first visited Consolidated's San Diego plant in 1940, they were building B-24s outdoors in the sunshine, each one different from the last, and it took us 180,000 man-hours to construct each aircraft." Ungría had sought for further information, stating that she had a professional interest in the field of military engineering. She stated, "I knew we could do better." With a sense of pride in his accomplishment, Sorensen complied. "I sketched up the complete production flow when I was staying in San Diego, and I did so for the entire night in my hotel room. In the same way that we construct automobiles, we would construct bombers. However, rather of having workers swarm over a stationary aircraft, we would move the aircraft past workers who were immobile. Every worker would carry out particular activities on a regular basis, with the goal of reaching excellence via constant practice. It was the Spaniard who had inquired about the difficulties that such a complicated workforce presents. As a response, Sorensen stated, "We constructed an apprentice school that provides training to 8,000 workers monthly. 40% of our staff is comprised of women. They have smaller hands, which allows them to work in tiny locations, and they have more patience, which allows them to do activities that are repetitious. Among our workforce are people of African descent who operate complex machinery. There are 16-year-old lads in charge of supply logistics. Employing all of the human resources that are at your disposal is what democracy entails, Colonel." German intelligence got continuous information verifying Willow Run's production rate. These reports came from Swedish, Argentine, Japanese, and Turkish sources. During his visit to the factory in March 1943, Swedish engineer Erik Lundberg made the following observation. "The plant operates with efficiency that defies European understanding. 1,600 specialized machine tools are utilized by them, the majority of which are built for single tasks. The capital outlay is tremendous, with tooling alone perhaps amounting to $200 million. Independent corroboration was supplied by a communication sent by Japanese Commander Toshikazu Omi to Tokyo that was intercepted by German intelligence. The message stated, 'This single factory produces more aircraft monthly than the entire Japanese aviation industry.'" During the month of April in 1943, German intelligence had compiled exhaustive data from 17 different sources, which confirmed the manufacturing pace. The numbers were staggering. Willow Run alone was manufacturing 650 B-24s per month at its height, and the total output of B-24s in the United States exceeded 1,400 per month. Because Canaris was so desperate to find out the facts on the ground, he gave the go-ahead for Operation Pastorius, which involved sending saboteurs into the United States by submarine. Before moving back to Germany in 1939, George John Dash, who was the commander of one of the two teams consisting of 4 individuals, had spent 20 years living in the United States. His orders from Canaris were to acquire intelligence on aircraft manufacture before carrying out any sabotage activities. His directives were kept a secret. After coming ashore from U-202 shortly after midnight on June 13, 1942, Dash's party arrived to Amagansett, Long Island, in the early morning hours of that day. Tormented by the ramifications of his mission and what he already knew about the capabilities of the United States, Dash turned himself in to the Federal Bureau of Investigation within a few days. During the course of his interrogation, Dash disclosed a revelation that taken his American captors by surprise. "Canaris himself told me that Berlin does not believe your production figures. Some people believe that Willow Run is propaganda." He desired evidence that would compel Göring to acknowledge the nature of the situation, such as pictures, staff counts, and shipment records. Charles Landman, a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, remarked in consternation, "They don't think we're creating a bomber every hour?" Bitter laughter emanated from Dash. "Agent Landman, I call this place home. Your factories for automobiles have been observed by me. My attempt was to convince them that if Ford was able to manufacture a vehicle every minute prior to the war, then they could most likely manufacture a bomber every hour while the war was going on. They leveled the accusation that I was a defeatist. Canaris personally gave the intelligence to Göring on April 20, 1943, which was Hitler's 54th birthday. The presentation took place at Karen Hall, which was the opulent hunting home of the Reichsmarschall located north of Berlin. The encounter would go down in history as a legendary event among German intelligence officials due to Göring's total denial of facts about the situation. Photographs, papers that had been intercepted, and information from dozens of other sources were all delivered by Canaris. In the manner of a dealer displaying cards that would result in the loss of the game, he fanned them out on Göring's enormous wood table. Canaris began his statement with great caution. "Herr Reichsmarschall, we have confirmation from 17 different independent sources. One B-24 Liberator is being manufactured at the Ford Willow Run facility every hour when production is at its highest. Göring, who weighed more than 280 pounds at this time in the war, picked up one of the images that showed the assembly line reaching into the horizon. He said, "They have been able to maintain this rate since January." "Canaris," Göring remarked with a tone of disdain, "do you seriously consider me to be a fool? It is clear that they are wooden mock-ups, which are used as propaganda props. People in the United States want us to believe that they can construct aircraft like sausages. It is likely that this Willow Run facility produces no more than 50 bombers every single month." Canaris retrieved yet another document, which was a manifest that had been stolen from the Pennsylvania Railroad and displayed aluminum shipments inside it. "Mr. Reichsmarshal, this particular factory is responsible for the consumption of 16 million pounds of aluminum on a monthly basis." Göring laughed angrily as he said, "That's more than our entire monthly production. The question, therefore, is, where do they acquire this aluminum? By their African-American employees? With regard to their female riveters? The misinformation that comes from the United States has led you astray, Canaris." After a week had passed, Canaris was called to the Wolf's Lair to personally update Hitler on the situation. The conference was attended by Joseph Goebbels, who was the Minister of Propaganda, as well as Generals Jodl and Keitel. Canaris gave the intelligence to Hitler when he was reviewing maps of the Eastern Front, which was where the Wehrmacht was preparing for Operation Citadel, also known as the Battle of Kursk. Hitler listens with impatience as Canaris does so. "Mein Führer," Canaris remarked, aware that he was putting his life in danger, "if the Americans are producing 1,400 B-24s monthly, in addition to equal numbers of B-17s, in addition to their fighter aircraft, in addition to British production, the aerial bombardment of the Reich will soon exceed our defensive capabilities." The remark that Hitler gave was entirely typical. "Admiral, an automobile is not the same thing as a bomber. The United States of America is capable of mass manufacture of simple commodities such as automobiles and refrigerators. Precision, expertise, and devotion are all required for it. They say they were able to accomplish this in 16 months, but it took us 6 years to be ready for the First War. It's not even feasible." After analyzing the data provided by Canaris, General Jodl performed a computation. Hitler began by saying, "Even if we accept 1/4 of these figures as accurate," Hitler then interrupted by saying, "The figures are false." In December of 1941, the United States of America entered the war. It would be impossible to construct this miracle facility and achieve this level of productivity in such a short amount of time. Canaris had gotten video evidence of Willow Run in action from American intelligence sources in Switzerland, which was unknown to the leadership of the Nazi Party. 5 minutes of the assembly line in full action were seen in the film, which was smuggled in diplomatic pouches using Spanish diplomatic channels. During their time at the Abwehr headquarters, Canaris and his subordinate Hans Oster viewed the movie in a chamber that was locked. In order to capture the full mile-long assembly line, the camera went along it. There was a consistent flow of B-24s that were in every stage of construction moving by. Tasks were carried out with mechanical precision by workers, whether they were males, women, black, or white. The time was validated by a clock that was presented in many pictures. "My God," Oster murmured. "It's true." Canaris burned the film with his cigarette lighter and watched it burn. Oster couldn't believe what he was seeing. "We are unable to demonstrate this to them. They would accuse us of fabricating film or of betraying them because of our actions." The German intelligence service was able to get aerial images of Willow Run that had been taken by a Spanish ambassador in November of 1943. Photographic experts devoted weeks to analyzing the photographs. According to their findings, the parking lots contained approximately 12,000 vehicles, which indicated that there were 3 shifts of operations. Completed B-24s were visible at the adjacent airfield, which meant that 47 aircraft were ready for delivery. The assembly line was visible through skylights, and the aircraft were spaced exactly as reported. Rail sidings displayed dozens of freight cars as they delivered materials. Vernard, the headman, said that photographic evidence demonstrates that human intellect is there. It seems that the production rate is correct. When Göring was given the images, he regarded them as brilliant photographic manipulation coming from the United States, most likely utilizing scale models. He recommended an immediate strategic reconsideration because of this. A covert acquisition of the American information was carried out by Dr. Albert Speer, who served as Hitler's Minister of Armaments and was the only Nazi leader who possessed a true grasp of industrial production. The passage in his diary that was found after the war, which was dated May 15, 1943, indicates his desperation. If the Willow Run figures are even half accurate, we face not defeat but annihilation. Our annual production of airplanes is less than what they create in a single month. However, I am unable to convey this reality. It would be a death sentence for me if I did it. Data on the economy of the United States was evaluated by Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, who is the head of SD Inland and is trained in economics. In December of 1943, he sent a report to Himmler that was quite blunt. During the peacetime period of 1941, the Ford Motor Company produced 1.1 million vehicles. At the rates that are now in place, they have transformed this capacity into bomber manufacture. By the time June 1944 rolls around, the United States will have completed the production of enough B-24s to drop our total 1940 London bombing tonnage each and every day. In the evening of Christmas Eve in 1943, Canaris was provided with intelligence that revealed the following production forecasts for the United States for the year 1944. B-24 Liberators, 18,000. B-17 Flying Fortresses, 12,000. B-29 Super Fortresses, 1,000. Fighter aircraft, 40,000. A total of 86,000 aircraft. At the time that these data were delivered to Hitler, his answer was as follows. The Americans claim that they will produce more aircraft in 1944 than all nations have produced in the entirety of history. It's really ridiculous. Canaris was ousted from his job in February of 1944 on the grounds that he was suspected of being a traitor and a defeatist. Walter Schellenberg, who succeeded him, was a Nazi loyalist who would not have the courage to defy Hitler or Göring under any circumstances. But one could not continue to avoid the truth forever. During the Big Week on February 20th, 1944, the United States Air Force's 8th Air Force initiated Operation Argument, which involved the deployment of more than 1,000 heavy bombers against German aircraft manufacturing. In a span of 6 days, they dropped a greater quantity of bombs on Britain than the Luftwaffe had thrown on the country throughout the entirety of the Blitz. Adolf Galland, a fighter pilot with the Luftwaffe, reported to Göring, Herr Reichsmarschall, I have counted over 800 bombers in a single formation from my perspective. There were almost 11,000 Allied aircraft that appeared over France on June 6, 1944. These planes are genuine, and they are dropping actual bombs. Less than 300 fighters were able to be assembled by the Luftwaffe in response. A telegram of desperation was dispatched to Berlin by Field Marshal Hugo Sperling, which stated, The enemy's aerial superiority is absolute. There was no error in our intelligence. It was not the Americans who betrayed us. Rather, it was ourselves who did so. Willow Run had reached its highest level of output by the month of April in 1944. During that particular month, workers who worked in 2 shifts of 9 hours each, 6 days a week, produced 453 airplanes in a total of 468 hours. This production pace is equivalent to 1 completed B-24 Liberator being manufactured every 63 minutes. The manufacturing facility had a total workforce of 42,331 employees, with 11,000 women making up 26% of the workforce, 3,800 African Americans making up 9% of the workforce, and 200 handicapped people making up 3% of the workforce. The Nazi concept of race would have been entirely destroyed if this demographic collapse had occurred. In terms of population, the weaker sexes and inferior races were generating far more offspring than the German master race. In the aftermath of the war, German intelligence officials who had survived the conflict disclosed the entire extent of the disaster. During his testimony at Nuremberg, Walter Schellenberg stated, "By the beginning of 1943, we were aware of the truth regarding American production. Each and every professional intelligence officer came to the conclusion that the statistics were correct. But to reveal this fact was to put oneself in danger of being executed for defeatism." According to what Hans Bernd Gisevius stated in his memoirs, the tragedy was not that we lacked intelligence about American production. We were completely submerged in it. The tragedy was that our leadership refused to believe it because it was in direct opposition to their racial ideology. The German intelligence officers who attempted to report the truth ultimately paid a heavy price. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris was executed on April 9, 1945 at the Flossenbrück concentration camp. Hans Oster was also executed on April 9, 1945 at the same concentration camp. Alexis von Roena was executed in October 1944 for his involvement in the July 20th plot. Hans Bernd Gisevius escaped to Switzerland and survived the war. It was confirmed by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey that Willow Run had produced 8,685 B-24s between the years 1942 and 1945. This was the information that German intelligence had supplied. The monthly output reached its peak at 650 aircraft. The fee per hour was maintained for a number of months. A decrease in the total cost per aircraft from $238,000 to $137,000 was seen. In the course of the post-war interrogation of Albert Speer, the question of why Germany did not accept the intelligence regarding American manufacturing was pursued. To acknowledge that Ford was capable of producing a bomber every hour was to acknowledge that our entire world view was flawed. This included the notion that democracy was not weak, but rather powerful, that racial mixing did not result in weakness, but rather strength, and that women were capable of performing women's labor. Accepting the fact that we had begun a war that we would never be able to win would be required. Who, if anybody, were to tell Hitler that? Rose Willie Monroe, the real-life person who served as the basis for the character Rosie the Riveter, worked on the B-24 assembly line as a rivet gun operator. Prior to the events of Pearl Harbor, she, along with thousands of other women like her, had never worked in the industrial sector. In an interview that took place in 1984, Monroe states that we knew we were building something important. As we drove each rivet, we were contributing to the conclusion of the war. There were occasions when we worked double shifts, and we frequently slept in the parking lot in between hours. Flying these planes were our brothers, husbands, and sweethearts, among other people. In the event that intelligence regarding Willow Run was not believed, the following disastrous outcomes occurred. The production of fighters. Germany continued to manufacture bombers until the latter half of 1944. In the process of allocating resources were squandered on wonder weapons rather than being put toward actual defenses. The operations were planned against hundreds of bombers rather than thousands as part of the strategic planning process. Failures in diplomacy. Peace overtures were delayed because there was a lack of awareness on the possibility of loss. As German economists analyzed the records that were taken, they came to the realization that the true size was as follows. Willow Run cost $200 million, and Germany's entire investment in the aviation industry from 1933 to 1945 was comparable to $400 million. The floor size of Willow Run was around 3.5 million square feet, while the aggregate floor space of all German aircraft plants was approximately 8 million square feet. The amount of electricity that Willow Run used on a monthly basis was 2.5 million kilowatt-years. The citizens of the United States had constructed a single plant that utilized more resources than the entirety of German cities. Following the conclusion of the war, the final accounting showed the entire scale. 18,188 B-24s were manufactured in all. There were 8,185 homes developed in Willow Run. 12,731 B-17s were manufactured in all. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States built a total of 337,717 aircraft. Total German aircraft built 1940 to 1945, 9,400. The United States of America manufactured 3.2 times more aircraft than Germany did when they were engaged in a war that involved two oceans. The failure of German intelligence to provide information about American manufacturing is considered by historians to be one of the most significant in the history of military operations. It was not a failure of collection. More specifically, German operatives obtained intelligence that was precise and thorough. Those in senior positions refused to acknowledge intelligence that was in direct opposition to their worldview, which was a lack of acceptance. Dr. Gerhard Weinberg came to the conclusion that German intelligence had appropriately evaluated the manufacturing capability of the United States by the beginning of 1943. If this intelligence had been taken seriously and put into action, Germany could have been able to seek peace 2 years sooner, which would have saved the lives of millions of people. This tale teaches us some very important lessons. As a result of cognitive bias, accurate intelligence may be disregarded if it is in conflict with fundamental beliefs. Blindness to ideology. It is possible for political ideology to take precedence over mathematical fact. Failure at the systemic level. Intelligence systems that penalize uncomfortable facts receive falsehoods that are safe and comforting. Inaccurate estimation of the adversary's capabilities can result in failures of catastrophic proportions. Rose Willie Monroe, a former Rosie the Riveter, met Hans Rudel, a former Luftwaffe pilot, during the dedication ceremony of the Yankee Air Museum at Willow Run in the year 1985. Rudel said, "How did you manage to construct so many in such a short amount of time?" The response that Monroe gave was, "Honey, we simply went to work every day and did our responsibility. It's nothing grand. Simply punch in, construct bombs, and then punch out. The democratic process is not difficult. Free folks simply trying their best to make a difference." Rudel addressed the issue by saying, "We were told that democracy made you weak, and that your diversity made you inefficient. We were told lies, and those lies were responsible for the deaths of millions of people." In May of 1945, American intelligence operatives uncovered a last German intelligence report on Willow Run. The paper was dated April 20th, 1945, which was Hitler's last birthday. The report stated, "Willow Run production confirmed. This information was reported by us 2 years ago. No one believed what we said. It is not a lack of intellect that leads to Germany's demise. Rather, it is a lack of wisdom that leads to the belief of intelligence that is in opposition to what we want to be true. Learn from the mistakes of the generations to come. Reality does not conform to dogma. It is not possible for mathematics to succumb to mythology. When the truth is ignored, disaster results." There was never any delivery of the report. Hitler had retired to his bunker by that point. There were only a few days left for the 1,000-year Reich to survive, and hundreds of American bombers, many of which were constructed at Willow Run, delivered the concluding argument that German intelligence had attempted to make 2 years before. The conclusion that can be drawn from history is unmistakable. German intelligence was of the highest quality, but the acceptance of German intelligence was disastrous. A cautionary tale for all countries may be found in the fact that they are unable to accept unsettling realities. No matter what you believe, reality will not change. Those individuals who choose to not acknowledge reality in favor of ideology will, in the end, be destroyed by it. We manufactured more than just bombs at Willow Run. This provided evidence that democracy is effective, that variety is beneficial, and that freedom is a source of production. All of them were counted by German spies. There was no belief among German leaders. This skepticism was just as likely to be the cause of the Third Reich's demise as any bomb.